all you advocacy animals. This is Kona at Disability Rights Montana, and we are entering fall in the Treasure State. Daylight is fading earlier. The ground is covered with crunchy leaves, and I think I can speak for most people in Montana and say we're all a bit over all of the political ads. But this is my plug that if you are not already registered to vote, go register and vote, or just go vote. All qualified electors right now can go to their county election office, register to vote, and also cast their ballot as well. So if you have not done that already, or if you've been thinking about it, please put it on your list to do. The more people who vote in Montana, the more accurate a picture we're all going to get as to how we want, as Montana citizens, the state to move forward. So please get out there and cast your ballot. In recent episodes, we have had some guests, we've had some staff members, but today you just get me. However, there may be a little bit of something here for everyone in this episode because I'm going to go through Disability Rights Montana's priorities and objectives for our 2025 fiscal year. So if you want to learn more about what we are working on regarding access to housing, access to government services, improving mental health services, supported decision-making, education, and more, stick around and see how we're trying to accomplish these things and if there's any areas in which you would like to help. Our priorities and objectives are put together by two groups of folks. One is our board of directors, and the other is what we would call our PAMI Advisory Council, which PAMI is an acronym which stands for Protection and Advocacy of Individuals with Mental Illness Advisory Council. So annually, these two groups, they give us as staff members, and on our staff, we have attorneys, advocates, administrative staff. They give us these priorities and objectives and say, hey, for this coming year, we want you to focus your efforts in these areas. And an umbrella to that is that Disability Rights Montana uses this guidance to determine how we can carry out our federally mandated activities. And those include monitoring, investigating, advocacy, and education of people with disabilities about their rights, and the education of public policymakers. So we take these priorities and objectives, and then we move forward in trying to achieve these priorities and objectives, or work toward them within the federally mandated activities that we are required to do. Disability Rights Montana does not try to accomplish our priorities and objectives in isolation. We will always promote self-advocacy and partner with other disability groups or other groups that have a desire to move forward in a similar direction, because as we know, disability as an identity and as a community spans and crosses most, if not all, other communities and identities. And so we are excited to always work with partners and also individuals. So if you are listening to this and you think, oh, one of these is something that, this is an issue I have, or this is something I feel like I want to work to help make better for the disability community, please contact our office and we'd love to chat with you. So let's dive in. There are 8 total priorities. Each priority has a few objectives underneath. I may not go through every single one of those because it will get a little long if I were to do that. But our priorities and objectives document, I will link in the description below. And it is also available on our website, disabilityrightsmt.org. So the first priority of our priority and objectives document is to secure the basic needs of Montanans with disabilities by increasing access to housing. There was a report that came out by the National Association of Realtors. I'm looking at the report right now. I don't see a date here, but I'll link it below. And it's been picked up by many news outlets. There is an article in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle that quotes it, and it shows that Montana is essentially the least affordable state in the nation to live. And this is based on the median. Two numbers it's based on primarily is the median home sale price in Montana compared to the median household income. So from 2018 to 2023, the median home sale price in Montana rose from $266,000 to $505,000. So that's an increase of about 89.6%. The median household income rose from 2018 at $55,000 to $70,800 in 2023, which is only a 27.9% increase in median household income. So these numbers are, again, two of the primary numbers they use in this article about the unaffordability and Montana being the least affordable state to live in the country. This housing situation we found ourselves in as a state does affect disproportionately people with disabilities. So we want to make sure that housing is stable for people with disabilities. And there's a lot of pieces involved, but that's kind of like our priority one in a bubble is to help stabilize the housing situation for disabled Montanans. The second priority for Disability Rights Montana for the 2025 fiscal year is to secure the basic needs of Montanans with disabilities by improving disability-related government services. One of the main objectives we have under this priority is to ensure the continuation of Medicaid. If you want to learn more about Medicaid, a couple weeks ago, our Director of Public Policy, Krista, and I sat down and just gave a really high overview of Medicaid and kind of just how it works in our state. Again, very high level, but I'll put a link to that episode and you should go ahead and listen to that if you want a little bit of a primer about Medicaid and how it operates in our state. If you are a person who already knows about Medicaid, perhaps you're a person that either was denied eligibility or has a claim denied, let us know. Give our office a call or send an email to advocate@disabilityrightsmt.org, and we can get you our guide on what to do if your Medicaid eligibility or claim is denied and how to get covered again. So again, give us a call or better yet, send us an email, advocate@disabilityrightsmt.org, and just request this guide from us and we'll send it over to you straight away. One of the other objectives we have under this second priority of improving disability-related government services is to highlight something that is currently allowed in Montana, but we would like to see evolve out or change, which is the ability for businesses to apply for a certification that then allows them to pay sub-minimum wage to people. And typically those people are going to be people with disabilities. So there are businesses out in Montana right now that employ people with disabilities and pay them less than minimum wage. You know, if you're hearing this and wondering that can't be true, and you're wondering, the program is the certification's called a 14C, and a 14C is, and that's a 1-4 and then in parentheses C. It's Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act authorizes employers, after receiving a certificate from the Wage and Hour Division, to pay wages less than federal minimum wage to workers who have disabilities for their work performed. So that is in the rule book right now. And there are people in Montana being paid less than minimum wage for work purely because they have a disability. One of the reasons we want to move away from sub-minimum wage is because we want people with disabilities, we want our community to be fully integrated into our communities. These sub-minimum wage employers they create an environment of a segregated workspace. And part of moving away from sub-minimum wage is to create an environment that's integrated in the community, that provides support for competitive, integrated employment and volunteerism for people with disabilities. So it really is it's really highlighting that, one, we need to pay people minimum wage and a living wage. And two, we need to be inclusive of people, whether or not they have a disability, in our communities and in our workspaces. Our third priority for the 2025 fiscal year is to secure the basic needs of Montanans with disabilities by improving mental health services. And that is a huge one. And that covers all adults and youth in the state of Montana who experience any type of mental health condition and need services. And so one of the objectives we have is to really focus on increasing community-based mental health services and the quality of those mental health services. Another objective is to work toward ending this substandard care. And what then ends up happening in substandard care is situations of abuse and neglect. And that can happen both in an institutional setting or in a community setting. And so there really needs to be an increase of quality of care for mental health services throughout the state. And speaking also of institutional settings, one of the other objectives we have is to really reduce the reliance, or if we can, end the need for an institutional setting. People want to be in community. They want to be close to their friends and family, their support systems, close to the doctors that they know. And this is a big deal. And so increasing community-based mental health services it's one of the objectives of where we're starting. And there's a lot of pieces around that. A lot of things have to move at once, but we do think it's achievable. Our fourth priority is to support the freedom of choice of Montanans with disabilities by expanding supported decision-making. Now, that phrase, supported decision-making, may be new to some people. So there is a term that might not be as new to some people called guardianship. Like, someone might be under a guardianship. You listening to this might be under a guardianship. Guardianship is what we would consider one of the most restrictive, or the most restrictive ways to kind of have to live your life. If someone is under full guardianship, you lack the ability to make choices, self-directed choices. A supported decision-making plan increases your ability to exercise your own choice, to exercise your own rights, while still providing, just as the name says, support in making decisions that you may need more help with. It takes a little more effort to set up, but it is generally more beneficial for a person with a disability to be under a supported decision-making plan instead of a guardianship. And if you want to learn more about supported decision-making, I'll link a fact sheet put out by the Rural Institute. And if you have questions, after hearing this or reading these fact sheets, please call our office or email advocate@disabilityrightsmt.org. The fifth priority put to us by our board of directors and the PAMI Council, PAMI Advisory Council, is to ensure the equal opportunities of Montanans with disabilities by improving reservation and rural education services. I think that's phrased a little strangely. So I myself am Native Hawaiian, and I'm not part of any of the mainland tribes. So I don't have that lived experience, even though I've lived on the mainland for quite some time. But I will say, as a Native cousin, that we just need to recognize colonization in this priority, and that education services for Indigenous people, if you want to call it a service, I don't know if I would, maybe just education for Indigenous people has been traumatic over time. And I do think that Disability Rights Montana has some work to do in just building the relationships here for this priority before we can jump into what tribal people need, what Indigenous folks need in our state. There are there's constant learning and constant need for humility in all of these conversations around indigeneity, history, and education. And that just, it starts with acknowledging that the history exists and that history is not just history. It is generational trauma that lives on through today. And so I don't know if I have much more to say on this priority. There are some logistical things that I know as a rural state we want to address to increase access to information, which is one of the logistics is to increase internet and phone and transportation access for public benefit of people in rural areas of Montana, which also includes reservations. And in increasing the logistics around that, that will allow for increased communication across our state and hopefully increased conversation on learning what tribal nations want in terms of support for disability services. And that's really what our interest is, and as I said previously, disability, no matter what culture you are from, there is a version of disability. Some Native peoples will say disability is a colonizer's word. That phrase is not mine, but I have heard this from others. And that's I believe that to be a true statement. And so it's really trying to figure out, how do we as what we'd consider ourselves a disability rights organization, do we fit in the logistics, in the scheme, in the procedure of how tribal nations want their nations to operate? So lots of work to be done in this priority. And if you are an enrolled member, or if you're part of a tribe, even if it's not federally recognized, if you are indigenous to the state of Montana and want to engage more in this conversation around disability as a colonized concept, and how that intersects at all with indigenous ways of knowing, and indigenous epistemology, let us know. And certainly you can certainly ask for Kona, and be happy to have a conversation with you about this. I know that I have lots of room to learn on, and so do many other people. And if there is a space to carve out to make that available, like I said, as a Native cousin, not from this mainland, would love the opportunity to make those spaces. So our sixth priority for Disability Rights Montana is to ensure equal opportunities of Montanans with disabilities by stopping employment discrimination. Huge again. I think all these priorities are just, we could have just picked one for the whole year, it feels like, but we have 8 and we're almost there. This is 6. But yeah, stopping employment discrimination for people with disabilities. People with disabilities, they face employment discrimination. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But one of our objectives is to increase job coaching for people with disabilities, increase job development for people with disabilities, and to really allow, to really just support the understanding of what are people's rights as a worker with a disability, and to really understand what are the pros and cons of having a disability in the work environment, and just the navigating the process in various environments. So part of the stopping employment discrimination is what I just described, is for maybe the person with a disability to know their rights. But I think the other, maybe more main part of that is to really have employers understand how to raise their policies off the floor of the ADA. If we're always aiming for the minimum, if you imagine you're walking along a cliff and the minimum is the cliff edge, you can do the minimum and still be on the trail. But if you're always just doing the minimum, you're just one step away from falling off. You're one step away from being off the trail. So part of stopping employment discrimination is really to figure out, how do we get employers, communities, groups of people to understand that the ADA is the floor, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, all these laws is like, just don't go below these things. But if we can build above them, there's less chance to go below them. And it doesn't actually take that much more work to get above the floor. And so, if you're a person with disability who's out there working, you're an employer who's trying to figure out, how do I move above the floor? How do I make my business more accessible to people with disabilities to work here? Hit us up, chat us up, let us know. We'd be happy to have those conversations with you. Priority 7 is to promote inclusion of Montanans with disabilities in all areas of life through transportation. Just at the end of last fiscal year, kind of bleeding over into this fiscal year, we had participated in a national campaign called Week Without Driving. And that was a campaign to really help highlight for people who are able to drive the difficulties of people who are not able to drive for a variety of reasons. And so our aim in this priority is to focus on people with disabilities who do not drive, and to help them in their cities around Montana to advocate for more robust and diverse transportation systems, accessible transportation systems. If their active transportation is an option, making sure those are accessible and safe. One of the challenges that we often have here in Montana is the weather for part of the year. And not just during the winter, not just snow, but also potentially during the summer when there's smoke in the air. Maybe active transportation works for part of the year for some, but when it gets smoky out, it might not work as much. How do we build a transportation system that helps prevent isolation if you are not able to go where you need to or want to go? If this is a topic that you are interested in, let us know. We do want to gather more information from folks around the state about their experience with transportation as disabled non-drivers. Priority 8, our last priority for the fiscal year, is to promote inclusion of Montanans with disabilities in all areas of life by enforcing accessibility laws in state and local government programs and services. And so this really is about physical and programmatic accessibility in government services. There are so many ways that services by our governments at different levels, whether it's federal, state, municipal, to increase accessibility. And that doesn't always have to be tear down the stairs and make a ramp, though we would love to see more ramps that are at the front of the building and not the service entrance. We recognize there is a physical accessibility piece to this, but there's also just a programmatic accessibility piece to this as well. Part of that programmatic accessibility piece is to allow for time as well. Like, just maybe it's the same progress or same policy, but maybe to make it accessible, you extend it from 2 days to 10 days or whatever a deadline may be. So it can be as simple as that. It can also, be as big as big construction projects. So this priority really is aimed toward just really increasing access across the board for government services. If you have stories about government services, either success stories or challenges that you've faced, we'd love to hear about them and amplify those so that we can all learn from each other in what we can do better as a community. Thanks for being here. If you have made it this far in the podcast, I appreciate your attention and I appreciate you tagging along to learn about our priorities and objectives that we will be working on for the next 12 months. If you are a person with a disability and you want to engage in any of these areas in our priorities, let us know. You can call our office, 406-449-2344. You can ask for Kona. You can also email us at advocate@disabilityrightsmt.org. I look forward to hearing from any of you, and we'll catch you on the next episode. If you want to learn more right now about a couple of the items that were talked about in this podcast, you can check out these other podcasts here. One of them on working as a person with a disability, how to disclose your disability at work, if you should disclose your disability at work. And the other podcast here is on the social versus medical model of disability, some of the history around disability, how that's come to be, and how we are trying to evolve into the future as a community.